I never really loved you. I just settled because I was scared of being alone, she confessed during our 15th anniversary dinner. So I calmly asked for the check and moved out that night. Now she's desperately texting that she made a mistake, while I'm finally happy. 15 years of marriage and I still got excited planning special occasions for Lisa, still believed that thoughtful gestures mattered in keeping a relationship strong. I'm Will, a financial planner here in Boston, and I've always been the type who plans ahead, whether it's retirement portfolios for my clients or anniversary dinners for my wife. That October, I was putting in extra hours trying to land Henderson Industries as a client, a deal that would set our firm up nicely, but I made sure to block out our anniversary evening weeks in advance, booking our favorite table at Harvest Moon, this elegant waterfront place in the North End where we'd celebrated our 5th anniversary. Lisa had been attending these evening personal development seminars 3 nights a week for the past 2 months, coming home energized but distant, talking about her life coach Paul and all these breakthrough realizations she was having about authentic living and finding her true self. I figured it was good for her. She'd been stressed about the restructuring at her marketing firm, working longer hours, seeming generally unsatisfied with where things were heading professionally. The seminars seemed to be helping her confidence, even if she was spending less time with me and more time journaling or reading self-help books Paul had recommended. I was happy she was investing in herself, even if I sometimes felt like I was competing with this Paul guy for her attention, though I told myself that was just my imagination running wild. While she was discovering herself, I was secretly planning something special, a surprise weekend getaway to that little bed and breakfast in Stowe where we'd spent our honeymoon, the place with the ridiculous antique furniture and the view of Mount Mansfield that had made Lisa cry happy tears 15 years ago. I'd been setting aside money for months, skipping lunches and putting client dinner expenses on my personal card instead of the company account, building up enough to cover the premium suite and that couple's massage package she'd mentioned wanting to try someday. The irony wasn't lost on me that while she was learning about authenticity and self-discovery with Paul, I was working overtime both at the office and at home, trying to create the perfect anniversary celebration for someone who seemed increasingly difficult to reach. I'd even arranged for her favorite flowers, white peonies that cost twice what roses did but reminded her of her grandmother's garden, to be delivered to our table right before dessert. Part of me knew something had shifted between us over the past few months, some subtle change in how she looked at me, like she was seeing me differently, evaluating me against some new standard I didn't understand. But I convinced myself it was just the stress of her job situation and my busy season creating distance, that a romantic evening and a weekend away would remind us both why we'd worked so well together for 15 years. I was still that optimistic fool who believed that love meant showing up, planning ahead, and putting in the effort to make your partner feel cherished, even when they seemed to be drifting away. The reservation was confirmed, the weekend getaway was booked, and I had no idea I was about to learn that all my careful planning and genuine affection had been wasted on someone who'd never really wanted me in the first place. The moment we sat down at our corner table overlooking Boston Harbor, I knew something was seriously wrong. Lisa kept checking her phone, barely acknowledged the white peonies when they arrived, and picked at her lobster risotto like it was cafeteria food instead of the $43 dish she'd specifically requested when I'd called to confirm our preferences. I'd ordered a bottle of that Sancerre we'd discovered on our trip to Napa, trying to recreate some of the magic from better times, but she was drinking it like water and staring out at the harbor with this distant expression I'd never seen before. Remember when we used to come here and talk for hours about everything we wanted to do together? I asked, attempting to bridge whatever gap had opened between us. All those plans we made about traveling more, maybe getting that sailboat, eventually moving to one of those Victorian houses in Cambridge we always admired? She nodded absently, still not really looking at me, and I felt this cold realization settling in my stomach that I was dining alone despite having company. I'd rehearsed a little speech about how proud I was of us for making it 15 years, how much I was looking forward to the next 15, maybe even mentioning the surprise weekend getaway, but her body language was screaming that she didn't want to be there. When I raised my wine glass and started to say, "Here's to 15 amazing years and many more to come," she actually put her hand up to stop me. "I can't do this anymore." The words hit me like physical blows, each one carefully chosen and delivered with a conviction that told me this wasn't some momentary doubt or anniversary anxiety. "I need to tell you something, and I should have told you years ago, but I didn't have the courage or the self-awareness." She was looking directly at me now, her eyes clear and determined in a way that was somehow worse than tears would have been. "I never really loved you, Will. I settled for you because I was scared of being alone, scared I'd never find anyone else, scared of disappointing my parents who thought you were such a catch." The restaurant noise faded to background static as I processed what she was saying, my brain struggling to reconcile 15 years of shared memories with this brutal confession. Paul's been helping me understand that I've been living a lie, that I married you out of fear and convenience rather than genuine love, and that's not fair to either of us. Her voice was steady, rehearsed, like she'd practiced this speech in the mirror or maybe with her life coach. I thought if I just tried hard enough, if I was a good enough wife, the love would grow naturally, but it never did. You deserve someone who actually wants you, not someone who's just grateful you showed up. I sat there holding my wine glass, staring at this woman I'd shared a bed with for 15 years, wondering how someone could fake love so convincingly for so long. So our entire marriage has been you performing a role you didn't want to play? She nodded, and for the first time that evening, she looked genuinely sad rather than just distant. I'm sorry, Will. I know this is terrible timing, doing this on our anniversary, but Paul says authenticity requires courage, and I finally found mine. I wanted to ask about all the times she'd said she loved me, all the plans we'd made together, all the moments I'd treasured as proof of our connection, but I realized there was no point. She just told me that none of it had been real for her, that I'd been married to an actress playing the role of a loving wife while secretly counting down the days until she found the courage to escape. I set down my wine glass, pulled out my wallet, and signaled for our server without saying a word, some instinct for self-preservation kicking in that told me the worst thing I could do right now was react emotionally in public. Can we get the check, please? I asked when Marcus came over, my voice sounding surprisingly normal despite feeling like someone had just told me my entire adult life had been an elaborate fiction. Lisa started to say something about splitting it or maybe not finishing the meal, but I just handed Marcus my credit card and waited while he processed the $300 tab for what would go down as the most expensive breakup dinner in Boston history. The drive home was 15 minutes of complete silence, her fidgeting with her phone and me focusing on traffic lights and turn signals, anything to avoid thinking about what came next. I'd handled enough financial crises for my clients to know that when the bottom falls out, you move quickly and methodically, securing what you can before emotions take over and cloud your judgment. The moment we walked through the front door of our Beacon Hill townhouse, I went straight to our bedroom and pulled out 2 suitcases, the big ones we'd used for our anniversary trip to Italy 3 years ago. Will, what are you doing? Can't we at least talk about this? She asked, following me around like a nervous dog as I systematically packed clothes, toiletries, and everything I'd need for an extended stay somewhere else. I gathered important documents from our home office, my passport, birth certificate, insurance papers, the deed to the house that was thankfully in both our names, and transferred them to a file box that went straight into my car. You've said everything that needed saying, I told her while loading my laptop and a few personal items into my trunk. There's nothing left to discuss. She was crying now, real tears instead of the composed confession from dinner, but I felt nothing looking at her distress except a distant curiosity about whether this emotion was authentic or just another performance. I used my phone to change passwords on our joint checking account, savings account, and credit cards, methodical clicks that severed our financial connections while she stood in the driveway begging me to stop and think about what I was doing. Will, please, I know this is a shock, but we can work through this. Paul says couples can rebuild trust if they're both committed to honesty. The mention of Paul's advice made me actually laugh out loud, a sound so bitter it surprised even me. I'll be contacting you through an attorney, I said, starting the car and backing out of the driveway where we'd shared morning coffee and planned weekends and argued about whose turn it was to bring in the garbage cans. I drove straight to the Marriott downtown and booked a suite for a week, figuring that would give me enough time to find a more permanent arrangement and start untangling 15 years of shared everything. Sitting alone in that generic hotel room at midnight, I realized I felt relieved rather than devastated, like I'd finally gotten an honest answer to a question I'd been afraid to ask for months. Monday morning, I was sitting in the office of Margaret Chin, Boston's most respected divorce attorney, a woman whose reputation for thoroughness and discretion had earned her a client list of politicians and Fortune 500 executives who needed their personal disasters handled with surgical precision. I want this done quickly and cleanly, I told her, sliding across a folder containing our financial records, property documents, and a timeline of recent events that I'd compiled over the weekend with the same attention to detail I used for client portfolios. No drama, no prolonged negotiations, just an equitable dissolution that gets me out of this marriage as efficiently as possible. Margaret reviewed my documentation with the methodical focus of someone who'd seen every variation of marital breakdown and knew exactly how these things typically unfolded. You're remarkably well prepared for someone who just learned his wife never loved him, she observed, making notes in the margins of our joint tax returns. I've spent 15 years planning for other people's financial security, I replied. Turns out those same organizational skills work pretty well for personal disasters. By Wednesday afternoon, we'd filed papers citing irreconcilable differences, a legal phrase that felt absurdly inadequate for describing what Lisa had done but served our purposes of avoiding a prolonged battle over fault and blame. I was back in my hotel room, reviewing client files and trying to maintain some semblance of professional normalcy, when Margaret called with interesting news about Lisa's recent activities. Your wife has been remarkably busy since your anniversary dinner, she said, her tone carrying the slight satisfaction of someone who'd uncovered exactly what she'd expected to find. She cleaned out your joint savings account yesterday, $43,000, and wrote a check to something called Authentic Life Coaching Services. I felt that familiar analytical calm settling over me, the same state I entered when helping clients navigate market crashes or unexpected financial emergencies. What else did you find? Margaret had recovered text messages from our shared phone plan, conversations between Lisa and Paul that painted a picture of emotional manipulation disguised as therapy, a man who'd convinced her that her marriage was holding her back from her authentic self while simultaneously positioning himself as the key to her liberation. It gets better, Margaret continued. Your wife quit her job this morning to focus on what she's calling intensive healing work with this Paul character. Apparently, he's convinced her that traditional employment is incompatible with spiritual growth. The irony was almost beautiful. Lisa had destroyed our marriage in pursuit of authenticity, only to be conned by someone who was apparently running a sophisticated emotional manipulation scheme. There's more, Margaret said, and I could hear the satisfaction in her voice. I had my investigator look into Paul Richardson's credentials. Turns out he has no actual training in psychology, therapy, or life coaching. His certificates are from online diploma mills, and he's been running similar operations in 3 other cities over the past 5 years. The bottom dropped out of Lisa's new reality faster than a tech stock during a market correction. Caroline, Lisa's best friend and the closest thing she had to family since her parents died, started asking questions when Lisa borrowed $5,000 for what she called essential personal development work with Paul. Caroline was a forensic accountant with the same instinct for following money trails that I had for spotting bad investments, and when she started digging into Paul's background, she discovered a pattern that would have been obvious to anyone who wasn't emotionally invested in believing his promises. Paul had been targeting women going through major life transitions, divorces, career changes, deaths in the family, offering them clarity and direction while slowly isolating them from friends and family members who might ask inconvenient questions about his methods or credentials. He disappeared last Friday, Margaret informed me during our follow-up meeting, along with approximately $200,000 from 6 different women who thought they were investing in personal transformation. Lisa had gone from confident self-discovery to complete devastation in less than 2 weeks, her savings gone, her job abandoned, her guru revealed as a fraud who'd vanished the moment his schemes started unraveling. Caroline called me directly, something she'd never done during our marriage, her voice tight with anger and embarrassment. Will, I know you probably don't want to hear from anyone connected to Lisa right now, but I need you to know that she's completely falling apart. She's been staying with me since Paul disappeared, and she's barely functional. I think she finally understands what she threw away, but I wanted you to hear it from someone other than her. I thanked Caroline for calling and assured her that I hoped Lisa got the help she actually needed, but I felt nothing resembling satisfaction at her downfall, just a kind of distant sympathy for someone who'd been taken advantage of by a professional manipulator, even if her vulnerability to that manipulation had destroyed our marriage in the process. 3 months after our divorce was finalized, I was standing in my new waterfront condo in Cambridge, watching sailboats navigate the Charles River while my coffee cooled in my hands, finally understanding what it felt like to live somewhere that reflected my actual preferences rather than a series of compromises designed to keep someone else happy. The place was a corner unit on the 8th floor with floor-to-ceiling windows, hardwood floors, and a kitchen designed for someone who actually enjoyed cooking instead of someone who ordered takeout to avoid potential criticism about meal choices. I'd bought it with retirement funds that Lisa couldn't touch, money I'd been saving for our theoretical future that turned out to be entirely theoretical on her end. The freedom to make decisions based purely on what I wanted was intoxicating after 15 years of calibrating every choice against Lisa's ever-changing moods and preferences. Business was booming in ways I hadn't expected, partly because discretion and competence apparently became more valuable when people witnessed your personal life imploding without any public drama or professional disruption. Henderson Industries had signed with our firm the week after my divorce papers were filed, impressed by what the CEO called my steady hand during turbulent times, and 3 more high-profile clients had followed within 6 weeks. I was working with a tech startup founder who'd made $40 million in a buyout, a recently retired federal judge who needed estate planning, and a surgeon who appreciated that I understood the importance of protecting assets from people who might not have your best interests at heart. My reputation for helping successful people navigate financial transitions had apparently been enhanced rather than damaged by my own personal transition, and for the first time in years, I was genuinely excited about work instead of just grateful to have somewhere to hide from domestic tension. The biggest change was adopting Scout, a 3-year-old golden retriever mix I found at the Cambridge Animal Shelter, a dog whose previous owners had surrendered him because they were too busy for pet ownership. Scout had been returned twice by families who discovered that dogs require actual attention and commitment, but he attached himself to me with the kind of loyalty I'd apparently been wasting on the wrong species for 15 years. Walking him along the river every morning and evening gave me a routine that felt purposeful rather than obligatory, and his enthusiasm for simple pleasures like tennis balls and ear scratches reminded me that contentment didn't have to be complicated or conditional. I started taking sailing lessons at the Boston Harbor Sailing Club, something I'd always wanted to try but had abandoned when Lisa made it clear she found boats boring and sailing lessons an unnecessary expense. My instructor was this patient guy named Mike who'd been teaching for 20 years and had seen enough middle-aged men working through life transitions to know not to ask too many questions about what brought me to his dock. Learning to read wind patterns and handle rigging gave me the same satisfaction I got from analyzing market trends, that feeling of mastery that comes from understanding complex systems and developing genuine skill through practice and attention to detail. It was during my 8th lesson that I met Janet, though I didn't know her name until later. She was sailing a small sloop by herself with a kind of confident competence that made it look effortless, and when a sudden gust nearly knocked me into the harbor, she sailed over and offered practical advice about weight distribution and sail trim with the patient tone of someone who'd taught nervous beginners before. Turns out she was the daughter of Eleanor Morrison, one of my newer clients, a retired economics professor who'd mentioned her veterinarian daughter but never suggested I might want to meet her. Eleanor had hired me to manage her late husband's pension rollover, and when she learned I was taking sailing lessons, she mentioned that Janet kept her boat at the same marina and might be willing to share some local knowledge about wind patterns and good anchorages. "You should meet her properly," Eleanor said during our next meeting, with the casual tone of someone making a practical suggestion rather than attempting matchmaking. "She's been sailing these waters since she was 12, and she's always happy to help serious students of the sport." I was beginning to realize that serious students of sailing, like serious students of financial planning, appreciated other people who took the time to learn things properly rather than just faking competence and hoping no one would notice the difference. 6 months after our divorce was finalized, Lisa began what I can only describe as a campaign to win me back, starting with casual text messages that appeared designed to test whether I'd respond to friendly overtures before escalating to more desperate measures. Her first message came on a Tuesday evening while I was helping Janet repair a sail at the marina. "Hey Will, saw an article about market volatility that reminded me of you. Hope you're doing well." I showed Janet the message, and she raised an eyebrow with the kind of amused skepticism that veterinarians probably develop from dealing with pet owners who swear their dogs never eat garbage despite obvious evidence to the contrary. "You're not going to respond, are you?" she asked, and I deleted the message without replying. Over the next few weeks, the texts became more frequent and increasingly personal. "I miss our Sunday morning coffee routine," followed by, "Remember that trip to Maine where we got caught in the rain?" And eventually, "I've been thinking about us a lot lately." When texts failed to generate a response, Lisa moved to handwritten letters delivered to my office, 3-page emotional appeals that my assistant Rebecca started intercepting with the practiced efficiency of someone who'd worked for divorce attorneys before joining a financial planning firm. "Should I keep filing these?" Rebecca asked after the 5th letter arrived, and I told her to forward them to Margaret Chin in case they became legally relevant but otherwise ignore them. Lisa's letters painted a picture of profound regret and personal growth, claiming that losing me had forced her to confront her commitment issues and that she was now in genuine therapy with a licensed psychologist who was helping her understand her fear of intimacy. "I know I destroyed something beautiful," she wrote in one letter I actually read before sending it to Margaret. "But people can change, Will. I'm not the same person who hurt you so badly. Please give me a chance to prove that I can be the wife you deserved all along." The escalation continued when she started appearing outside my office building during lunch hours, not approaching directly but positioning herself where I'd have to see her on my way to meetings or client appointments. She'd dress in outfits I'd always complimented, carry flowers or coffee from places we used to frequent together, stage these pathetic scenes of regret that were probably supposed to tug at my heartstrings but mostly just annoyed my colleagues who had to watch me navigate around her obvious ambushes. My business partner David suggested calling security, but I figured she'd eventually get tired of wasting her time on someone who clearly wasn't interested. The friend campaign started around month 3 of her reconciliation offensive, with Caroline calling first to say that Lisa was genuinely different now, followed by our mutual friends Tom and Sarah, who invited me to dinner and spent the entire evening advocating for Lisa's character transformation. She's really learned from her mistakes. Sarah insisted over dessert that I barely touched because the whole setup felt like an intervention designed by someone who didn't understand that some damage can't be undone through apologies and promises to change. Even my own sister called after Lisa somehow obtained her phone number and convinced her that I was being unnecessarily stubborn about forgiveness and second chances. Maybe you should at least hear her out, Amy suggested during our weekly phone call, clearly having no idea that she was essentially arguing for me to reunite with someone who'd admitted to faking love for 15 years. People do grow and change, and divorce is such a drastic step. I explained to Amy that Lisa hadn't made a mistake or had a temporary lapse in judgment. She'd revealed the fundamental dishonesty that had defined our entire relationship, but Lisa had apparently spun the story as a brief period of confusion rather than a decade and a half of fraud. The final confrontation happened at Harvest Moon, the same waterfront restaurant where Lisa had originally destroyed our marriage, during what was supposed to be a quiet dinner between Janet and me to celebrate our decision to move in together come spring. We were discussing logistics and timelines, holding hands across the table like adults who actually enjoyed each other's company, when Lisa appeared beside our table with the kind of dramatic timing that suggested she'd been stalking my movements. "Will, please, just give me 5 minutes," she said, ignoring Janet entirely and focusing on me with desperate intensity. "I know you think you've moved on, but what we had was real, and I can prove to you that I've changed." Janet sat back with the calm expression of someone watching an interesting behavioral study, while other diners turned to stare at the unfolding drama. "This isn't the time or place, Lisa," I said quietly, hoping to avoid the scene she seemed determined to create. "I love you, Will," she announced loudly enough for half the restaurant to hear. "I know I messed up, but I finally understand what real love feels like, and it's what I feel for you right now. She can't possibly know you the way I do." She gestured at Janet with dismissive contempt, apparently assuming that 15 years of fake intimacy trumped 6 months of genuine connection. When I didn't respond, Lisa's composure cracked completely, and she started crying those messy, desperate tears that attracted even more attention from nearby tables. "Please don't throw away everything we built together for some rebound relationship," she begged, reaching for my hand across the table. That's when the restaurant manager appeared with 2 security guards, and Janet calmly suggested they escort Lisa outside before she embarrassed herself further. "This isn't over, Will," Lisa called as they guided her toward the exit. "You know we belong together." Janet and I watched the entire spectacle with what I can only describe as bemused silence, like anthropologists observing some fascinating ritual from a culture we didn't quite understand. 8 months after that restaurant scene, Janet and I were sailing her 26-foot sloop through Boston Harbor on a perfect April afternoon, discussing paint colors for the bedroom in my condo where she'd be moving her things next month. We decided that spring was the right time to officially combine our lives, not because of some arbitrary timeline or external pressure, but because spending time together had become as natural as breathing and significantly more enjoyable than anything I'd experienced in my previous marriage. Lisa's harassment campaign had continued sporadically through the winter, using different phone numbers and social media accounts to send messages that alternated between tearful apologies and angry accusations that I was being cruel and vindictive by refusing to acknowledge her transformation. "I see you with her sometimes," she texted from yet another new number in February. "She'll never love you the way I do now. You're making a huge mistake." Margaret had finally sent a cease and desist letter threatening legal action if Lisa continued her unwanted contact, and while that reduced the frequency of her messages, it didn't eliminate them entirely. The strangest part was realizing that I felt absolutely nothing when her name appeared on my phone. Not anger, not pity, not even annoyance, just the same mild indifference I'd feel toward a wrong number call or junk mail. Janet found the whole situation more intellectually interesting than personally threatening, approaching Lisa's behavior with the same clinical curiosity she brought to treating anxious dogs who'd been poorly socialized. "She's basically a rescue case," Janet observed one evening while we cooked dinner together in my kitchen, Scout sprawled across both our feet like a furry bridge between our separate lives. Someone convinced her that love was supposed to feel desperate and unstable, so now she can't recognize the healthy version when she sees it. That was Janet in a nutshell. Practical wisdom delivered without drama. Someone who understood that genuine partnership meant making each other's lives better rather than more complicated. We'd been discussing marriage lately, not as some urgent deadline or proof of commitment, but as a natural next step for two people who discovered they wanted to build something together. The difference, Janet said while adjusting the jib sheet as we rounded a marker buoy, is that we both chose this. Nobody settled, nobody got trapped by fear or convenience, nobody's performing a role they secretly resent. She was absolutely right, and the contrast with my marriage to Lisa couldn't have been more stark. Janet and I had similar values, compatible life goals, and the kind of easy communication that made even mundane decisions feel collaborative rather than adversarial. We both worked demanding jobs that we genuinely enjoyed, we both believed in planning for the future while appreciating the present, and we both understood that love was something you demonstrated through consistent actions rather than dramatic declarations. I need to tell you something that might sound weird, I said as we sailed past Logan Airport, watching planes take off over the harbor toward destinations that no longer seemed impossibly far away. Lisa's confession at that anniversary dinner was probably the best thing that ever happened to me. Janet laughed, the kind of genuine amusement that comes from understanding exactly what someone means. Because it freed you to find someone who actually wants to be with you? Because it gave me the truth, I said. 15 years of wondering why something felt off, why I always felt like I was working harder than I should have to make someone happy, why genuine intimacy seemed so difficult to achieve. Turns out I wasn't imagining things. My phone buzzed from where I'd left it in the cabin below, probably another client email or maybe Scout's daycare confirming tomorrow's pickup time, but I didn't bother checking it because Janet was telling me about a sailing trip to Martha's Vineyard she wanted to plan for July, and that conversation was infinitely more interesting than whatever electronic demands were competing for my attention. Later, when we returned to the marina and I finally looked at my phone, there was indeed a new message from another unknown number that I recognized as Lisa's latest attempt to re-establish contact. I saw you two sailing today. You looked happy. I hope you realize what you gave up. I deleted it without showing Janet, not because I was trying to hide anything, but because Lisa's opinion of my choices had become as irrelevant as her opinion of my investment strategy or sailing technique. Some people spend their whole lives looking for the kind of partnership Janet and I had built, and I wasn't about to let someone who'd never understood love in the first place convince me I was making a mistake by choosing happiness over drama, honesty over manipulation, genuine connection over performed affection. The sun was setting over Boston Harbor, Scout was sleeping contentedly at our feet, and I was planning a future with someone who actually wanted to share it with me. Turns out that's what authentic living actually looks like.